Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Yotam Polizer is the global CEO of IsraAID, Israel's largest humanitarian NGO, leading a team of 300 plus who are currently active in 12 countries, including large-scale operations to support communities in Israel and Gaza following the October 7th attack and the war in Gaza. He has 15 years of experience in education, humanitarian aid, and international development. Polizer has built and led programs in Japan after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, and in South Korea to support the reintegration of North Korean defectors. He has also led missions in Nepal following the 2015 earthquake and in Sierra Leone in 2014 for Ebola survivors. Yotam serves on the board of directors of the Society of International Development, SID, and the advisory board of Just Serve, an international service initiative. He is the 2023 Charles Bronfman Award laureate, and he's in the studio from Israel. I'm so glad you're here in person. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
I'm sure you're a little jet lagged, but
I'm always jet lagged.
We're going to have to make it through an hour because there's so much to cover.
Sure.
We are speaking one day after October 13th, which is obviously a day that will live in history as when the hostages came home. It was a very emotional day. I would just love, as an Israeli who has lived through this up close in so many ways, but also very personally, can you just tell me how this has been?
It's almost hard to put it in words. I mean, it's the trauma of October 7th is, something that shaped all and will continue to shape our lives forever. But the hostages issue was an open wound for all of us Israelis, and for all of us it feels so personal. I mean, even I knew a few of them personally, but I feel like I knew all of them. I mean, we got to a point where we know their playlist, we know how they like to eat their cereal in the morning, we know everything about them. And so it does feel like history, and it does feel like the beginning of the possibility of healing.
When you say that we knew their playlist, what cereal they liked, it seems to me fairly unusual to have an entire country get to know and hold so close to their hearts what became 20 people at the end of the day and not give up. Like, how do you just diagnose the psyche, why it became so crucial, almost like a lifeline for these people to come home, and for all of the Israelis who stood in the streets or went to the streets week after week to protest or to at least keep the hostages on the front burner in people's minds?
I think it's two main things. One is really just how the country and its people are, have been forever. I mean, the issue of solidarity with people who are on the front line, whether they were soldiers, whether they were survivors from the Nova Music Festival or from the kibbutzim, it just touched us so personally. I think for many of us, we could see our brothers and sisters like in their place. They're like us. They are people. They are, in a way, they're so simple. There's no big celebrity there, but that's why we could really empathize with them so deeply.
Let's get to your work. And before October 7th, you actually hadn't worked in Israel, even though you are the angels of Israel, landing all over the world and saving so many lives, or certainly improving them. Before we get to October 7th, what was IsraAID? What was its mission and your role? Like, what did you get up every morning and do?
So IsraAID was established in 2001, and the vision was sort of to be this humanitarian wing of the startup nation, right? So the idea was to work anywhere but Israel. The idea was to, because we understand that Israel is far from being perfect. We have a lot of challenges in Israel, but in fact, we believe these challenges have also forced us as Israelis to build solutions that could and should be shared with the world's most vulnerable communities. So if it's water scarcity, we created water technology that could be used in Africa. If it's the ongoing trauma of the conflict or the Holocaust, we created trauma care programs that could be shared. So that was the vision of IsraAID, to bring these social expertise from Israel to disaster areas around the world, and we did it in 64 countries.
Wow.
64 countries, never in Israel, and never also in Gaza, which we'll talk about later. So I joined as employee number 2 in 2011. My first mission was the tsunami in Japan. 4 days after the tsunami in Japan, the person who was running IsraAID at that time, he offered me to lead a relief mission to Fukushima, and I said, why not? I always loved sushi, so I'll go to Japan. And I found myself there, and I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks with a team of doctors. I ended up staying for 3 years.
Wow.
And we ended up focusing a lot on mental health. And we also realized at that time that, yes, it's important to be first on the ground and provide aid and save lives, but it's even more important to stay and help these communities with healing and recovery, which is sort of what we're talking right now in Israel and in Gaza too. So I was sort of this disaster junkie, disaster freak. I was leading many missions around the world. I was in Japan, I was in the Ebola, in Nepal after the earthquake, where we found a woman who was trapped under the rubble for 6 days.
Wow.
Without food or water after we pulled out 21 dead bodies.
So Yotam, you've done a lot of this work and recorded it so that we can actually see what it looks like in action. Let's share one of those videos, but if you could tell us what we're about to watch, the Bronfman honor.
So it's a collection of me jumping on planes all over the world, from working with Syrian refugees to helping the evacuation of Afghan girls to finding the last survivors of the earthquake in Nepal. So it's a bit me as a disaster freak.
James Bond.
Not James Bond.
Humanitarian James Bond.
Humanitarian Michigane.
Okay, here we go.
After my military service, like every Israeli, I found myself trekking the Himalayas, and as I got off the mountain, I saw an ad that invited backpackers to volunteer with street children. That sounds cool, I'll do it for 2 weeks. And I ended up staying there for 3.5 years. I learned Nepalese, proved to be really useful when I went back to Nepal after the earthquake they had. We had a search and rescue team coming from Israel. We pulled out many dead bodies. And then in the morning of the 6th day, the commander of the team told me he hears something. So I screamed something in Nepalese and I heard back, Dukcha, it hurts.
1, 2, 3.
Her name is Krishna Kumari. She has 2 kids. She's 35 years old. People ask me how I can do this work for so long. These are the kind of stories that keep you going for the next 10 years. I went back to Israel in 2011 after 3.5 years, and literally 10 days after I went back, I got a call from the person who was running IsraAID at that time, asking me if I want to lead a mission to Japan. I grew up in a tiny village in northern Israel. I had the most beautiful childhood. I never thought I'd get involved in global disasters and humanitarian aid. But here I am at the age of 27, finding myself on a plane to Fukushima. In the beginning, it was very difficult. The Japanese, for them, accepting outside support is a sign of weakness. But we found this one kindergarten where 8 children died during the tsunami, and we offered to do a very simple stress release activity. And when the teachers saw how the children reacted to this activity, they were shocked. It's the first time the children actually expressed themselves regarding their trauma. That's also when we realized that in Israel, because of our own traumas, we developed an expertise that could really support the world's most vulnerable communities, using psychosocial support, helping people cope with trauma. And that started the second part of my career, which was to do a lot of different emergency missions around the world. We were always about sending our team within the first 72 hours, but even more important, our teams are still on the ground in Ukraine, in Moldova and Romania, and in 16 other countries. Personally, this is the more important part, not just being first on the ground, but being the last one to leave. December 2015, a boat capsized, and I was carrying this cute Syrian girl. I could see that she was suffering from severe hypothermia. Her father stood nearby, and then when he finally opened his mouth, he said, "My worst enemy became my biggest supporter, and the people who are supposed to protect me back home in Syria are chasing me away." And I think it was the first time that I realized that this terrible tragedy could turn into an opportunity, not only to save lives, but to build bridges and to change people's perspective.
A group of 125 Afghans trying to find a way out. Led by Yotam Polizer, the already treacherous journey made even more dangerous because of the nationality of their rescuers.
Hi, Yotam. My friend, you have taken IsraAID to a very high level, and we know it's going to continue and even grow stronger.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Toda.
So how did you learn what to do and how to do it? I mean, it sounds like we should understand it, but these are massive operations and with so many challenges on the ground.
Look, I think it's, I learned African studies and international relations in university, in Tel Aviv University and in Israel Open University, but honestly, you learn from the field. You learn from being there. And I sort of called what I do active anthropology, because a lot of it is about diving into local cultures, identifying the challenges and opportunities, and building and strengthening local communities. So there's a lot to learn about it, and now I speak Japanese and I speak Nepalese, speak a lot of not very useful languages, but proved to be really useful in these
Are you just good at languages? I mean, those are.
I think I'm okay with languages. I honestly think the best way to learn language is to be really frustrated. And when I went to all these disaster areas, you really want to be able to talk to the people and to really understand what is going on. So I forced myself to learn these random languages. And by the way, they helped us saving lives. I mean, in Nepal, we were able to identify this lady who was trapped under the rubble because I was able to speak to the local community who pointed the exact location where this lady was buried. So
you're creating partnerships right away. And before you get there, I mean...
It's sometimes before we get there. Look, whenever there's a crisis, the protocol, if you will, is that there's a crisis somewhere in the world, there's an earthquake, a tsunami, a wildfire, a flood. We have our emergency response team in Israel. We usually get on the phone in the first 2 hours, and we see, okay, from what we know right now, based on their initial assessment, there's an issue of access to clean water, there's an issue of medical needs, and then we decide who from our team that's based in Israel we will send for the initial relief. And then this team that we will send, usually a small team, it needs to be very hands-on, very dynamic, very flexible. We have countless stories where we come with our 5 Israelis and there's like teams of 100 or 200 people from the UN or from the Red Cross, and we just pass by because they're stuck in costumes and so we're there first on the ground. It's very, very important to be there first in order to save lives. But it's even more important because that's when you actually build relationships and you identify the local people that could help. And then the next stage is really we build a local team. We train, we support, we mentor them, and they continue the work long term because our goal is not to be needed. We don't want to create dependency. So right now, out of our 450 full-time staff around the world, 85% are non-Israelis, are locals that we hired and trained, and they work for IsraAID in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ukraine, in Guatemala, in all these places. And they're doing the work in the long run. And again, the idea is to build capacity because for us, success is not just how we save lives in the current disaster, is how we're able to save lives, how the local community will be able to support themselves in the next one. We know that many of these countries suffer from crises every year, whether it's climate-related crisis or ongoing conflict, etc.
And how do you decide, I mean, there's a crisis every day. How do you decide which actually to show up for?
So it depends on 3 factors. First of all, the scale of the crisis. Second, if we're able to identify local partners who are really interested in the type of expertise that we bring. I mean, if the main challenge will be to fix the electricity, that there's no we don't have an added value. But if the issue is access to clean water or issue is trauma. And the third thing, which is just reality, is funding. Because unfortunately, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, there's so many crises like in DRC, in Congo. Nobody talks about it. Nobody, and we know that media attention brings donor attention. We can't do our work without philanthropic support right now. So, so these are the three kind of components. We also know our limits. I mean, at some point, I think in 2017, there were crises everywhere in 20 countries at the same time when we were stretched really too thin, so we had to be more focused. And of course, after October 7, when for the first time the crisis was at home, we realized we need to scale down some of our global operation, not all of them. We kept a lot of them in order to be able to focus on our darkest hour.
So let's talk about that darkest hour. What did you do right away, and what have you continued to do in these 2 years?
So, I told you that whenever there's a crisis somewhere in the world, it takes us about 2 hours to figure out who are we sending for the first initial response. October 7 was different. It was very personal. It was shocking. For the first few hours after October 7, on that dark morning of Simchat Torah, we had to focus on our loved ones. We had to see that our families were safe, our loved ones were safe, our team was safe. And I didn't know because, again, as I said, the mission and the vision of IsraAID was to work anywhere but in Israel. After a few hours, we realized that a lot of the people who went through the worst atrocities, the survivors from the kibbutzim, like places like Nir Oz and Be'eri, they were evacuated to hotels. In these hotels in Eilat and the Dead Sea turned into like refugee camps, for lack of a better term. And we know how to work in refugee camps, and we work in refugee camps all over the world, from Syria to Afghanistan to South Sudan to Ukraine. So we sent our team there, and it was chaotic. It was a mess. And we realized that all of this expertise we had from 64 countries was needed at home. And so we launched a massive operation. In the peak, we had 200 staff working just on the response in Israel. We helped manage 16 evacuation sites for these refugees, for these internally displaced people who lost everything on October 7th. We provided, our approach was to provide solution for these people. They went through the worst of the worst atrocities a person could think of. So I remember one day the people from Be'eri said, we want to have a school for the kids. And not because school was important, they need something for the kids so the parents could start breathe for the first time. So the day after, we had a school ready that we built together. We recruited teachers. Some of the teachers were, the teachers they had originally were murdered or kidnapped or recruited for reserve. So we built the schools from tents in 2 days, and the school was running for a year. And we did a lot of mental health support program, which is what we're doing around the world. We did a lot of the logistics. What happens in October 7, but also happens in every big crisis, there's something that I cynically call the Aid Festival, which, is based on the notion that everyone wants to help. And I, half joke, but everyone wants to send their grandmother socks, right, as a donation. I mean, it's not always the most helpful thing. And you need somehow to make, to make sense of this chaos. So that was a lot of our role, to really coordinate a lot of these volunteers and a lot
to
of
make
people.
sure that the right aid was coming. I mean,
the right aid is coming. That yes, because one of the most
structures.
basic principles in humanitarian aid is do no harm. And you don't want to create dependency on the one hand, but you also don't want to create this train station of volunteers coming and going, and then it actually adds another layer of stress and anxiety for these local communities who went through this trauma. So we ended up managing a lot of these evacuation sites in these hotels in the Dead Sea and Eilat, and that was the first year. And then we expanded our operation to other communities in Israel. We realized, for example, that the Bedouin community in the south suffered tremendously. Quite a few Bedouins were murdered on October 7th. Some of them were kidnapped. And unlike the Jewish community in the south, most of the Bedouin communities don't have bomb shelters. So we ended up building 62 bomb shelters for Bedouin communities in southern Israel, which is something that I never thought we would do. But it was essential. The first person who was severely injured by the Iranian attack was a Bedouin Muslim Israeli girl who
Yes.
didn't have a bomb shelter. So that was a big priority for us.
Those from the south who went to the north, or those from the north who were displaced, there were hubs, right? But was there also kind of like who has a home, who has a place, or was that really organized very quickly? Just in terms of the numbers of people that needed
Right. I mean,
shelter.
in the first 6 months, we had between both north and south, we had almost 300,000 people internally displaced. It's a huge number.
Wow.
For a small country like Israel. I would say the south people evacuation was more organized than the north. Most of them went to hotels, not everyone. And some of them had kibbutzim, other kibbutzim who hosted them. So for example, kibbutz Kfar Aza, that we all heard of, was hosted by another kibbutz called Shfaim near Herzliya. Kibbutz Nachal Oz was hosted by another kibbutz called Mishmar HaEmek in the north. The people from the north, which is actually where I'm from, I grew up in a small moshav near the Lebanon border, they were all over the place. And that was one of the main challenges for them. And a lot of our work right now, 2 years later, which we can get to later, is focusing on helping these people from the north get back to their homes. It takes too long, partially because they were not evacuated as a community. And in the south they were, so the communities were really
Stayed
able
intact.
to stay intact and were able to support themselves. And it happened more in the kibbutzim. You know, I thought a kibbutz is a thing of the past, but I was wrong. I mean, I was amazed to see how these kibbutzim, the communities there, are so strong. They're so supportive of each other, and they really were so resilient. By the way, the other thing we did was supporting the Nova survivors. So we ended up taking 1,200 survivors of the Nova Music Festivals to healing retreats in Cyprus.
Wow.
There was a special place in Cyprus called the Secret Forest, which is a kind of a retreat center. And together with the owner of this place, who's an Israeli guy, we arranged these healing retreats. And a lot of these Nova survivors... Healing retreats, yeah.
Wow.
So it was a place...
1,200 all at once, or
No, every week we took a different group. So altogether, every week we took about 70.
And who was there giving counseling? And
So there was a lot of therapists there, but it was very soft. The idea was really just self-care. So, you know, and a lot of these kids from the Nova, they're spiritual. So they did a lot of yoga and meditation. Really, and most of them said, by the way, that was the first time they could sleep a whole night. We knew that it wasn't enough, by the way. We knew that they would need long-term mental health support. We just saw a Nova survivor who killed himself
that's horrible.
last week.
Yes, and his mother
So we
had-
made sure that they continue the therapy after they go back, but that was the beginning of their the journey towards healing. And a lot of them talk about this experience as a very kind of
Beautiful.
important stage in their recovery. So that was Israel.
So let's turn to Gaza, because that's where obviously there's a little bit of resistance, because here you are doing all of this incredible work, and suddenly, at least in some people's minds, you're helping the enemy, which is obviously way oversimplified. But I want to put it out there at the front because it was out there in the news.
Yeah.
And I think that you explain it better than anyone as to the why of it. How did it come to be? And I think what I really think is important for people to know is that obviously you didn't do any of this without the government and the IDF's understanding that you were doing it.
Yeah, and maybe even before Gaza, I think for me, some of the most kind of important operations we had globally was actually with countries and communities that don't have diplomatic relation with Israel. We worked a lot with Syrians, Syrian refugees. The story that I always share was about a Syrian girl who was on a boat on the way to Greece, and the boat capsized. And that day we were pretty close. We were able to pull everyone out, and I was carrying this very cute Syrian girl in my arms, and she was literally shivering and shaking and suffering from severe hypothermia. I handed her over to our doctor, who was actually an Arab Israeli doctor who treated her. And then her father came to me and he said, "My worst enemy became my biggest supporter. And the people who are supposed to protect me back home in Syria are chasing me away." And to me, that was in 2015, 10 years ago. And it was the first time that I realized that through these tragedies, we have an opportunity not only to save lives, but also to build bridges and to change people's perspectives. And that was in Syria. And then in 2021, I found myself on the border of Afghanistan. And we had a very dramatic Fauda-style operation. We pulled out 205 girls from the hands of the Taliban.
It was a miracle.
It was a miracle. At some point, we printed passports for them. I mean, that's a material for another interview. But
or a movie.
Or a movie. Yeah, there's a movie actually.
Oh, really?
There is a movie about it. It's
Wow.
called Day Trip. by an Israeli documentary filmmaker who was with me on the rescue team.
Wow.
But these Afghan women are now sharing, Shabbat Shalom every week. And when I received the Bronfman Award, the keynote speaker was actually the captain of the Afghan girls robotics team that we pulled out from the hands of the Taliban. So that was the sort of history of how we work. Obviously, Gaza is more complicated than Syria or Afghanistan for us. It's so personal, and they are considered our enemy. Honestly, when of course, when the war started, I couldn't even think about it. It was so personal, and October 7 was very personal to me. I lost someone who was my mentor, Vivian Silver, who is this incredible peace activist who worked a lot with Palestinians from Gaza. She was taking children from Gaza to Israeli hospitals.
She was burned in her house, I believe.
She was burned in her house in Kibbutz Be'eri. First, they found her phone in Gaza, so they thought she was kidnapped, but then they found her remains in Kibbutz Be'eri. I worked with her, again, more than 15 years ago, on a project between Bedouin and Jews in the Negev in southern Israel, because she was also very involved in that space. So I couldn't even think about any support to Gaza. As time passed, like 2 or 3 months into the war, we were watching the unfolded humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And for me, it was pretty clear from the beginning that you have Hamas and you have the people who are suffering. And there are children, there are babies, and we got in touch with a lot of them who are anti-Hamas activists, who are really suffering from the war. But it was also clear to me that there's nothing that we can do. We're IsraAID. We can't be hands-on in Gaza. We usually are boots on the ground. We can't be boots on the ground in Gaza. So I didn't think we can get involved. But then, about 3 or 4 months, I think it was February 2024, so 4 months after the war started, we started to receive some requests. And the request came from two sides. One was from different humanitarian organizations, international organizations that work with us in Ukraine or in Afghanistan, who were trying to deliver aid into Gaza, but they were stuck. They had like a truck that was stuck there. They couldn't receive the custom clearance. They couldn't procure the aid. They couldn't receive the permits from the IDF. So they basically came to us and said, we need your help because you're Israeli, but you're also humanitarian. So you have this dual identity, and you understand. You have the trust of both sides. You have the trust of the humanitarian organization, and you have the trust of the Israeli authorities. So we need you to help us facilitate aid into Gaza. At the same time, we received requests from the IDF, who are also, there's a special unit in the IDF called Kogat, and this is the unit that's in charge of facilitating aid into Gaza. And they were also looking for organizations that they can work with to facilitate aid. It was part of Israel's policy.
And I want to make clear, Kogat is actually part of the IDF.
Yeah, Kogat is an IDF unit that's in charge of all the civilian goods going into Gaza.
I know that Hen Mazig was a Kogat member.
Correct, yes. Hen was there and many others who are influencers and others. And they're doing a very difficult job, obviously, for them because they have to balance between Israel's security concerns and the humanitarian needs on the ground. And I think when people talk about, if I'm kind of zooming out for a second, when people talk about the crazy, blame game in the media and Israel and the UN and you name it, people forget the simple fact that balancing between humanitarian needs and security concerns is almost mission impossible. And what makes Gaza almost mission impossible is because it's so different than all these other places that we worked in. In Afghanistan, in Syria, in Ukraine, in Sudan, the big difference is that the civilian population is able to leave the war zone. In Ukraine, people move to Poland or people move to Western Ukraine, far from the front lines. In Iraq, people move to Kurdistan. In Syria, people move to Greece or to Lebanon or to Jordan or to Turkey, or far from the war zone in Syria. It's a big country. In Gaza, people have nowhere to go.
You can't leave.
You can't leave. You were able to leave a little bit in the beginning of the war through Rafah crossing, but then it was closed, and people can't leave. So, and we saw how Hamas is using civilians as human shields. So that's what makes it so difficult, and that's why our role as an organization who understands both Israel's security concerns and the humanitarian needs was so crucial. So eventually I found out that our unique positioning of being both Israeli and humanitarian is the key. And we have the opportunity to identify organizations that are trusted, that just want to deliver aid to civilians, bring them on board, support their efforts, and making sure that they get the approvals and the vetting they need from Israel. And that was a win-win for everyone.
And it wasn't like anything was happening without Israel's knowledge.
Everything that goes into Gaza needs to get Israel's approval. Needs to be screened by COGAT, needs to be approved by COGAT, including the staff, including the truck drivers, including the warehouse's location. And of course, what really got us deeply involved was a terrible tragedy of the World Central Kitchen.
Yes.
So in April...
That's Jose Andres' organization.
Jose Andres, yes, the chef, the organization. We worked with them in Puerto Rico when there was a big hurricane here. We worked with them a little bit in Ukraine, so we knew them very well.
They showed up after October 7th in Israel.
They showed up after October 7th. They reached out to us on October 8th and said, we want to deliver aid to these families who lost their loved ones in Israel. And so we collaborated with them, and it's still operating in Israel. There's a famous
I just
Israeli...
saw a story that they're back.
Well, not only that they're back, they never left.
Oh.
They just provided food for hostages and their families. But the Israeli chef that works with Jose, her name is Ruti, who's a very dear friend of mine. She's incredible. Ruti Russo. She's still running their organization. So even though there's no hunger in Israel, there's no food crisis, they're doing much more than that, because it's about how you use food for soul. Like it's mental health through food aid.
But that horrific event is...
That horrific event where 7 of their staff were killed accidentally by the IDF really triggered us to get deeply involved, because I realized there is a big problem here and we can play a major role. And so our role was first just to be a facilitator and making sure that the communication between the aid organizations and Israel is productive, pragmatic, and is solution-oriented. And again, you don't need to talk about the challenging relationship between Israel and the UN, not even getting into UNRWA, but even other UN organizations. So our focus was really to identify organizations that just want to focus on getting aid to the people and are not focusing on the blame game. And our goal was to help them bring this aid into Gaza and provide them all the solutions they need. And at some point we ramped up and we really became this logistics hub. So we decided that it's much better to procure the aid in Israel, to provide them warehouses in Israel, so we would bring all this aid to the crossing. Then with the IDF approval and vetting, these trusted organizations would pick it up and distribute it to civilian population within Gaza. And we were able to reach 250,000 people.
Wow, so that was working.
It was working. It was never easy because, as I said, it's an active war zone. So quite a few times we reached the crossing into Gaza and we were told by the IDF that there is an active fighting nearby, so we have to pause the aid and deliver it tomorrow or the following day. And I think when we again think about how much blame was in the media about aid, Israelis stopping aid, blocking aid, etc., we have to look at the last 2 years. The policy of aid really changed many times. At some point, there was more restrictions on aid because of security concern or because Israel was trying to pressure Hamas to agree to the deal. And at some point, there was flood of aid. For example, when there was ceasefire and a hostage deal, both the first and the second one, Gaza was flooded with aid.
So just to get some of the questions and concerns out of the way that many believed from very disparate reports. One was that Hamas was stealing the aid, hoarding the aid, often reselling it at exorbitant prices so that Gazans weren't getting it. How true was that?
Look, diversion of aid is a big issue not just in Gaza. It's a big issue in war zones. In a place like Gaza, where the active war zone and the civilian population are all in this one condensed area, it's a big issue. So there was definitely diversion by Hamas and by other groups as well. We believe that the way to prevent diversion is doing the following.
More,
One,
not less.
more, not less. And I think now that's the approach that the government is taking, and I heard it from quite a few government officials, including people who are very close to the Prime Minister, who agreed with our approach right now that you have to flood the zone, because then you take out the economic incentive. We saw, and the lowest point we reached in terms of scarcity of aid in Gaza was early July, where the prices of flour reached more than $100 for 2 pounds.
That was July 2025.
July 2025, that was the lowest point. So since then, the government changed policy, and we're seeing more, and the prices dropped more than 90%. But that was a big concern. So it's an issue of supply and demand. That's one thing. The second thing is really working with trusted and vetted partners. So if you know, and Israel has the tools, not IsraAID, Israel, the country, the Shin Bet, the intelligence authorities have the tools to screen the truck drivers, the routes. You have to, and the key to avoid diversion is actually very close communication between the IDF and these aid organizations, making sure that all the people involved in the aid delivery are vetted, making sure that the routes are screened, so there's what we call deconfliction, meaning there's no active fighting anywhere close to the route that is chose. We have to remember that looting, we saw a lot of these videos, right, of people jumping on trucks. The big majority of it are desperate people who are just, grabbing whatever they can. So we can divide this looting into two. There's looting by armed groups, including Hamas, which is something that we really need to do whatever we can to avoid. And there's looting by mass of people who are just desperate for food. So we believe that by supply and demand, if you flood the zone, you can prevent most of it. And then the second part is really making sure that the organizations who are doing the work on the ground are trusted and vetted by the Israeli authorities.
First of all, this is obviously a very dangerous operation. I'm sure everywhere that you have encountered these kinds of pressures and threats. But for the people volunteering, either driving the trucks, distributing the actual food, how does IsraAID manage that? Is it just like you sign a waiver and you know that you're going into a war zone?
Look, these are mostly Palestinians. These are people from Gaza who are locals, and first of all, they're desperate to bring aid to their families and communities. They're desperate for some income. So it's definitely, when it's an active war zone like Gaza, it's a life-threatening operation for sure. But the risk is mostly with the local Palestinians who are working for these aid organizations. The big majority of it is done by locals who are, again, vetted by the IDF and the Israeli authorities.
There was, and Israel didn't deny this, that policy of trying to pressure Hamas by
blocking aid.
And that was basically from March to May 2025.
Right. And that's what led us in a way to, and again, that's not just me saying, it's government officials and IDF officials, that's what led us to how we got to a really low point. Look, what happened was that before this blockage of aid, we had the ceasefire, and we had the hostage deal before, the one that just took place 2 days ago.
That was January.
That was January. It was late December, January, and early February. And during the ceasefire, there was a lot of aid going into Gaza. And then Israel stopped all the aid in an attempt to pressure Hamas to agree to the second part of the deal, what they call back then the Witkoff proposal. And Israel was saying at that time that there was enough aid in Gaza because so much came in during the ceasefire.
So they have enough in stockpile, so if we stop it, they're not going to starve.
But the reality was, and again, I've heard it from many officials, that most Gazan, like you take an average family in Gaza who are in a tent, they don't have a refrigerator, they don't have a place to stockpile, and they had no idea the war will continue at that time. So it's not like they were stocking on supplies. Who did stock up? Maybe Hamas. So that's how we reached a situation.
In other words, when they have like flour, they can't do anything with the flour.
Yeah, I mean, they can keep 1 bag, 2 bags, 3 bags, but they can't keep
They can't keep anything refrigerated, and
they can't keep anything refrigerated for a long time. And quite frankly, again, at that time, they thought the war was over. The average Gazans. I mean, there's a lot of evidence of it everywhere. And then the aid was stopped for almost 3 months, 2.5 months. And then when it was reopened, it reopened slowly, and they reopened it partially with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was the new mechanism, which was never tried before. So it was a pilot, and there were a lot of different challenges. The main issue that time, and again, that's not just me saying subjectively, these were the people who were running the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. We were not part of this mechanism, but we met them many times.
This was GHF.
GHF, right.
And I've heard you say that instead of aid being in a lot of places, suddenly it was in one place. And so that's part of why.
Right. So aid was in one place. Mainly they had 4 points, so 3 of them were in southern Gaza, 1 was in the center, nothing in the north. So a lot of desperate people, hundreds of thousands of desperate people were on these centers, so it created a huge challenge there. And you didn't have enough aid in the north. So then eventually Israel opened another crossing and allowed aid to go to the north, but it took some time. And that's how we reached this really
That was when the headlines about starvation and the pictures.
Right. So again, I'm not a scientist myself, but we knew that there were severe malnutrition in different pockets in Gaza, and we knew it because we heard it from many of our trusted partners who are actually anti-Hamas. We knew it because we worked with this, we were following this Israeli professor from Hebrew University who was tracking the food prices in Gaza, and that's when, the prices were skyrocketing. So then that was early July where we really reached the lowest point, and then the government took the right decision to allow aid to come in from multiple directions and to sort of reflood Gaza with aid. There were still challenges, but that's when the situation started to improve. And of course, now when we have a ceasefire, we're seeing big improvement. Now,
before you go on, I want to again channel the skeptic or the person who says, until the hostages are out, why is Israel essentially supporting and sustaining a people that wants us dead?
So look, I think there's different ways to look at it. I can tell you that the people that we work with, the organization we work with, were desperate to have the partnership with us. They were very positive about working with Israel and with IsraAID and with Israeli civil society organization. I can tell you that when I went to the kibbutzim, the people who survived October 7, and told them that, they said, one of them actually told me that's the most hopeful thing she heard since October 7, because she said, if Israel is doing it, she knows that we care about her security and her safety. And it's better that an organization like IsraAID are doing that to make sure that A, the aid really reaches the civilian population and not Hamas, B, that it's done with trusted partners and vetted partners. So it's a question of responsibility. And C, I also strongly believe that there were the civilian population who suffered tremendously. They needed the aid and they needed the support. And going back to my stories, I see again how us getting involved is an opportunity, not just to save lives, but also to build bridges and change people's perspective. But I'm not naive. I don't think we can change everyone's perspective. But I think through this work, we do see a change. We do see a change.
I will just betray my bias, which is that I'm extremely proud that your organization exists and helps, and that it's you doing it and not someone who doesn't have the full perspective on security and what it means to actually help another human being without endangering Israel on the other side. What I will
and maybe just to add, really, thank you, first of all. Our work, not only that it was always with the approval of the IDF, it was with their request. They asked us for this support. For them, the fact that they had an organization who really understand humanitarian aid, who have this relationship and trust with the humanitarian community, was crucial for their success.
They also stood up for you, or I would say the government did in some ways. I would love you to tell that story, because some may not realize that there was a little bit of a hullabaloo when the UJA Federation gave $1 million to IsraAID, something I was very proud of. There was I don't know exactly where the discomfort or the anger was expressed, social media, etc. How did you deal with that dust up? And can you say what the president did stepping in?
So first of all, for us, this whole effort in Gaza was under the radar. We didn't talk about it publicly. First of all, because we didn't want to put anyone at risk. We didn't want Hamas to go after our partners in Gaza. We felt it was important to tell the story. On one hand, we need the world to know that there are Israelis who are doing this, but on the other hand, security and safety is first. When we found a way to tell the story without mentioning the names of our partners in Gaza and making sure they're not at risk, we went public. And that was just before the UJA gave their donation. And when we did, it was actually very well received. I mean, we didn't get any negative responses. I spoke on CNN and on Fox and a number of podcasts and interviews.
No, you were on Dan Senior.
I was on Dan Senior podcast. And I have to tell you, even people who I think were very, they couldn't think about aiding Gazans, I think they really appreciated our perspective. And they thought to themselves, okay, it's better that organization like IsraAID in doing that than organization who don't care at all about Israelis and Israel's future and safety. So I think, we were able to tell our story and to share our narrative. When the UJA donation came in, I think for the way it was published was not telling the full story. And the way it was published was we're giving aid to Gaza. And then all these concerns of diversion, this aid is going to Hamas, all this came, on the surface. And they did a lot of things to communicate and to explain, to share, and I think eventually it calmed down. We didn't get so much backlash ourselves, I have to say.
UJA got it.
UJA got it. Look, we really appreciated the support, and I thought that was very, very important that an organization like UJA, which is really mainstream Jewish communities doing that. I think it sends such an important message to the world, to the Jewish community, especially to the younger Jewish community, and again, it was done with us, which is in a way that is saving lives, but is not compromising Israel's security. And telling this story, and I recognize that for some people, even if no matter what explanations you share, the psychological barrier was too hard. But I can tell you that even with these people who are the hardest, when I have this conversation with them, eventually the big majority, we can't convince everyone, but the very, very big majority are saying, okay, I understand it's better that Israel is doing that than other organizations who couldn't care about us.
I channeled kind of the more right-leaning American Jews. Now I'm going to channel the more left, and particularly the younger 20s and 30s, who, especially at the height of the need, let's not posit that it's starvation, because I know we'd have to talk for another hour about what actually is famine and what was intentional and what isn't. But it looked intentional to a lot of those people watching it. And they were Jews who said, I cannot stand by a country that would starve another people, even in war. How do you answer those people for whom they haven't necessarily recovered from watching those pictures? And let's put aside, because again, I think it's distasteful to me to argue that because the New York Times published one picture that I think was inexcusably inaccurate, that there weren't other pictures that were accurate. There was clearly a need, as you said, if we're not going to necessarily parse.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the blame game came from all sides, and for us it was clear that the humanitarian situation in Gaza was desperate. It was desperate. Now we can argue about the reasons, but it was desperate, and it's pretty clear to me how we got into this desperate situation, and it goes back to this extremely challenging situation of war zone and civilian population all in the same small area without the possibility to separate between the civilian population and the active war zone. which creates a huge challenge. And now I don't think it's a good answer to just say it's complicated, right? It is very extremely complicated. We have to do a better job. And we, I mean Israel and Israelis and Jews. And so my kind of main message to the world, especially when I went public, was number one, there is a humanitarian crisis, a real one. That's not fake news. And whether it's we reached this level of malnutrition or we have pockets in Gaza, it was very clear that we're in a desperate humanitarian situation. But number two, which is also true, is that the only way forward is for Israel to be part of the solution and not just be seen as part of the problem. And we need all hands on deck. And the best way to support Gazans, civilian population, is to actually work with Israeli organizations like IsraAID, because again, we understand the humanitarian needs and we understand Israel's security concerns, and we have the possibility of balancing these two better than others. So, when people are asking, was there a crisis? Yes, there was a real crisis. I'm not an expert to say if it was famine or this, but there was a real crisis.
There was also a sense that Israelis were turning a blind eye to it, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, for many Israelis, not just people on this side of the political spectrum, on that side, for many Israelis, it was such a terrible trauma, October 7th, and an ongoing trauma because of the hostages. So, and we all watched the images and the videos of the hostages, and we saw their conditions when they came out, for those who came out. And so people were saying, like, how come we need to get our hostages back? I think it would be very interesting to see now. We're seeing, by the way, more and more Israelis getting involved, both individuals, organizations, including companies, including Israeli hospitals. I think there's much more openness to it, even before the remaining living hostages were released. I think now, going forward, we'll see much more Israelis involved. I think what is easier for people to understand is that it's very important for Israelis and for Israeli civil society to be part of the solution.
So let's talk about the way forward in the time we have left. It's not much time. Just what do you see as possible in terms of rebuilding? You've already said in multiple interviews it's going to take years, but if it was your roadmap, your blueprint, how would it happen?
Look, I think the big million-dollar question, of course, everyone is asking is who is going to govern Gaza? Hopefully, it will not be Hamas, of course, and there will not be also a significant power. So it will be something with involvement of moderate Arab states, the UAE, that is already, by the way, working with us in Gaza and work with us on Afghanistan too. So it really depends when you think about long-term recovery and rebuilding of Gaza, rebuilding the infrastructure especially. The key is who will govern there. Right now, the focus is still life-saving assistance, so food, medical, access to clean water, tents, shelters, that's what's needed.
And I think part of that?
We're very much part of it, yes, and we're actually ramping up our efforts as part of the new deal that was just signed, the hostage deal and the ceasefire. The number of trucks that are going into Gaza right now is 600, which is more than the number of trucks that came in pre-October 7th.
Wow.
So we are a big part of this effort, and I think it's very important to be part of this life-saving effort.
What's on those trucks?
Food, medicine, tents, these are the main things. So very, very basic humanitarian supplies right now. As part of the agreement, once there's a new government in Gaza with this Arab countries' international force, they will start the rebuilding. So that's how this deal was signed, to make sure that none of the rebuilding, like the kind of long-term rebuilding and recovery, will be done while Hamas is still around and in power. Let's see if that happens, right? That's the big question. I think
People
if it does
will have to keep moving, Gazans will have to keep moving as they rebuild. I mean, this is essentially a parking lot at this point.
Yeah, it's a parking lot, and it's very dangerous, and there's so many leftovers from the war zones and these huge piles of rubble. So it's not livable right now for the long run. It could be You could build better refugee camps. It's potentially safer now because there's no active fighting. I think obviously the big question for us is everything that's kind of long-term about education, for example. It's obviously a big concern what the education system. But I also think there's a huge opportunity here to build back better. So we definitely see ourselves involved in the immediate on humanitarian relief, but also potentially in the long-term recovery efforts. How much we will be able to be involved in these recovery efforts, it really depends on who will control Gaza. In my vision, I will see IsraAID workers working in Gaza, and I hope to see again a day where we can bring Gazans for treatments in Israeli hospitals. I mean, that was our reality pre-October 7. I think it's more important than ever right now. We will have to see.
So I want to end by asking, for you as a Jew, how does your Judaism inform this work, if that's not an unfair question?
For me, one of the most, I'm not, I'm very Israeli hands-on kind of person, but
you mean not so spiritual?
Well, I do consider myself spiritual, but in a very Israeli way. But one of the concepts that really guide me, which I think is actually a very Jewish concept, is the concept of post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth.
PTG, which is this notion of how when there is a crisis, when there is a trauma, when there is pain, it's not just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward. And I actually gave a TED talk a few years ago called Disasters as Opportunities. And I spoke about how in each of these crises and tragedies we found opportunities. Again, and it doesn't mean that we should hope for these crises to happen, but they will happen with or without us. And the question is, what are the opportunities and how, and the story that I shared about the Syrian refugee or with the Afghan girls, it's a story of post-traumatic growth. It's how this terrible tragedy turned into an opportunity to build bridges and change people's perspective. I think the story of the Jewish people, the story of Israel, is a story of post-traumatic growth from the ashes of the Holocaust to the state of Israel, right? I mean, that's the most, one of the most profound kind of stories. When we think about not just Gaza, but also Israel, our hostages are back now. Maybe for the whole region, we can reach post-traumatic growth. And I see IsraAID playing a major role in there through this humanitarian diplomacy. We can rebuild not just Israel, but also Gaza and the region. I mean, look at Lebanon, look at Syria, look at Sudan. We have so many challenges and so much pain and so much need for healing, but so many opportunities. So that's sort of my Jewish vision of post-traumatic growth.
Thank you, Yotam, for being with us today, for the work that you do and the difference that it makes. I'm putting it on the screen. It's IsraAID, and those two A's are sometimes hard for an American to say. Check out the website.
We're Israelis after all,
Check out the website. Check out the videos that show the work actually happening. And there's interviews with Yotam that you should hear that even though you should start with us, you should watch those too. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. Thank you for being with us.